Good morning and welcome everyone. Today we will be talking about REST to database. So basically about how to get the results of your REST requests into a database. My name is Olaf Monien and I'm an Embarcadero MVP, the coordinator of the German-speaking region, and I'm also the owner and CEO of Developer Experts. We offer consulting, training and project support, mainly in the area of Delphi development, and we have offices in Germany and the US. If you have any question, just send me an email at olaf@monien.net. All right, REST to database. If you have a REST service where you attach a client to, then you issue REST requests, and typically the results are packages of JSON. That JSON could then be transferred into some sort of a memory table. Here we will be looking into the TFDMemTable, and then from that memtable you probably want some of your data to be transferred into some tables in your databases. Of course, you can do all these three steps manually, like taking a JSON package or a JSON fragment and parse that manually and extract every single item that's in it, or use something that's already built into Delphi. And then if you got a parsed JSON result, then you can certainly program something and put that manually into a memory table or some sort of a temporary store where you have then methods and means to operate on that memory store. And then from that memory table, you certainly would want to put some of the data into a real database, be it SQLite on mobile devices, or if you're on a server backend, put that into a Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, whatever. So there are tools in Delphi to make most of these things work more or less automatically without much of programming. And that's what we are looking into today. And I thought I made this video because there are always questions around this area of operation. All right. This is Delphi 10.3, second update. And technically everything I'm showing here should also be working from within C++ Builder. All right, so I have a relatively simple and artificial demo application that pulls data from a REST service and tries to put that data into a database. So let's have a quick look at what the application actually does. So this is a relatively simple one. So we have a button that pulls or that sends a REST request to some service. And when the service comes back or the result comes back, it's JSON that obviously is already parsed in here. And what we see in the upper grid is the representation of a memory table that's somewhere in the application. So the next step is execute a batch move. And the batch move is now taking care of analyzing the data which is in a memory table and put that into a database in the database backend. So batch move obviously copied some code or copied some of the records which are up here. So we have 100 result records in that original query result or the REST result. And we have obviously 100 records which are now in a database table. So what does this thing do? Of course, it's meant to be a synchronization thing. So even if I change something in the database, so this is editing the database, just overwriting some stuff here. So test 1, 2, 3, and do a refresh or refresh the database. So this is in the database now. When I now say get the data from the service again, and then look at the second record which says some key as SE, which is just stupid text, and then we do the batch move, you realize it's overwriting the actual text that we already edited here. So in this demo, it's all about getting the data into the database. All right. So it's not about handling edits that have already taken place in the back end and see how that data should be handled in regards to what we have in the REST service. It's really just from top to bottom. Just get the data from the REST service and put it into the database. And you see it's not actually creating duplicates. We still have 100 records in the database. We can actually prove that even in the database. I have a database tool here. The database behind, for simplicity, is just a SQLite database. Of course, you can use any database that Firedoc has drivers for. So I created a simple table called posts. So this is about post, some sort of a forum or whatever, and we have 4 fields. There is an ID field, user ID, title, body. That's pretty much what we have already seen in that demo application. So this is the data that comes from the REST service here. And just execute, select asterisk from post, and here we go. So this is really the database. Okay, and just to make clear, we are really connected to that one here. Just let's overwrite something here. Just some stupid text in here. It's now in the database. Refresh or do a new request here. And it's in the database. And we go back to the demo application, and you can see it's connected to the very same database here. And I do the batch move again, and it converts back to what's in the REST service. And if we do the execute query here again, you see it's again the value which is in the REST service. All right. So relatively simple, the scenario that we have. So what is the web service or the REST service? So I decided to take something very simple that you can use without any, you don't need to sign up for something, you don't need authentication. So there is something which is quite interesting. It's a JSON placeholder service. It's what they say, a fake online REST API for testing and prototyping. This is really nice. It's just there. You can issue REST requests. They have posts, comments, albums, photos, to-dos, and users, and we are just working with the posts here. So a REST request would be just something like that. So you have the base URL, and then we are asking for the endpoint posts, and that you can see that here is plain JSON. That's already something that Firefox does. So it's rendering those results into something very easy to read. So we can have a quick look at the raw data, which is what most of you probably expected. So we have an array here. So here is an array of objects. So this is a single object here. It's a user ID. It's the ID of the post, the title, and the body. And that's pretty much it. So we have the array, which is obviously 100, has a length of 100 items, and that's what we are parsing in Delphi. So how to get started with REST requests and how to get a REST request or the result of a REST request into a memtable. Okay, so in this simple application, I have a form and I have a model here. The model is technically a data module, and here we start. This is the TREST client. The TREST client basically only has one simple property that I set, and that's the base URL. So this is the URL of the service API, which is in our case just jsonplaceholder.typecode.com. That's all we need here. And then we have a request, a TREST request, and that one is connected, of course, to the REST client, which is here. And I told the the TREST request, that it's gonna look for the resource or endpoint posts. That's all I have to do, okay? So you can actually at that point already right click and say execute. This will actually from your IDE, from your development environment, it will execute the request to the actual API. So it just says response 200 OK, which means everything worked. So your setup, your basic setup already works. Okay, so we have something in the request that starts the request, which is the resource name here or endpoint name. And then, of course, there must be a place where the results are stored. And for that purpose, there is a response property, and that is connected to a TRESTResponse. So that one just got hooked up here. So here's the connection. And that one has no specific settings. Everything in here is default. I didn't change anything here. And now on the response, you see there is clear response data. All right. So this obviously, because we hit the execute, it took the result, the JSON, and put that into the response. And that's the reason why it says, or why it actually has a button clear response data. So this already knows about the data that we are pulling from the REST API. Okay, this is still in the IDE, and we didn't do any programming so far. So how would I get these response data, this JSON, which is still somewhat, well, an abstract thing? How would I put that into something more readable, like a grid? So for a grid, we need something probably like a data set. And I took from FireDuck, I took the TFDMemTable. This is very similar to what a client data set does, but it's more modern, it's faster. So this is basically for now all default, and I didn't connect it to anywhere. There is a binding component. So what we want to do is put the response result, the JSONs in some parsed way, into the memtable. And we need a binding component, which is the adapter. It's a TRESTResponse dataset adapter. So this thing in the middle, that adapts the dataset to the response. So when you put that here, you tell it, okay, there's a dataset that's empty, memtable posts, that's that one, and it has a response. So it's connected to the response. So that one in the middle is connected to the left, to the response, and to the actual data set. Okay. Now you can actually say, we actually had the request executed. So there is already data in the IDE. This is all still IDE, so to get things set up. And now you can go and say update dataset. That basically takes the JSON through the response that we got from the request and tries to analyze what's in it. And if it's finding some sort of an array, well, yeah, every single item in an array, in a JSON array, remember we have that array here. So look into the raw data. So this is an array. So everything in that array is going to be converted into a record from a database perspective. So this is going to be a record, and it's looking at the names of the items in here. So it's going to be a record that has a field user ID and a field ID and a field title and a field body and so on, right? So we go back here, and now because we said update dataset, that means transfer or try to transfer all the data into the mem table. That means that this memory table now has data in it. And we can actually go to right-click that memory table and say Edit Dataset. All right. And this is quite interesting because, remember, we are still just in the IDE. There is a small property editor, if you will, and that previews all the data in that memory table. So this pretty much looks quite well. Okay, so, and of course you can do fields editor. I did that previously already, but you would usually just see nothing in here when you go in here first, so we can just do that. And of course I get a little error because I already connected to some of the fields, no problem. So I recreate all fields, so add all fields from the data that you have. Actually, something broke because I need to update the dataset once more and add all fields. Here we go. So that update dataset is required to push the data again into the dataset. And now adding fields basically looks into the data and it recognizes that there is data and that this data is organized in certain fields, and it's creating persistent fields now. Fine. Okay, so the next thing is now certainly to make sure that we can actually display the data in that memory table, in that grid. So this is a FireMonkey application. So we are not using the VCL mechanism of T data source and T dataset. This is going to use visual live bindings. And visual live bindings is basically done on this form. And we have in our model, in the data module, there is the memory table empty posts, and we have a string grid. And this string grid is automatically bound or can be bound to the memtable. I'll just recreate that. Just let's remove all this here, so that you get an idea of how I actually got to that. So we are removing the links here. Hold on. Okay, we do it differently here. Go to the columns editor, remove all the columns, and here we go. All right. Okay, so, and now we can actually remove that one. Okay, so this is the starting situation. You got the memory table over here, and we got the string over here. So to get a connection between those two guys, you basically move or put those asterisk properties together. And now the interesting thing is you can go to the columns editor of your grid and say add all fields. And through this link, it basically asks the connected data source to tell the grid about the available field names. And that's what's happening when you press this button here. This is add all fields. And the Visual Live Bindings editor basically updates all the links here. And then you can, of course, go to the columns editor again and, for example, move up the ID field to show as a first field of the grid. And of course, you can set properties like the width here. Let's set that to maybe 100 or whatever, so that we see a little bit more of the text. Okay, or even the body should probably at least be 200. This is just a visual value. It's not, has nothing to do with the actual field length. Okay, so I reconnected everything again, and now let's see if we broke something. Of course, we broke something. Let's see. Oh yeah, the application is still running. That's not important. And now restart the application and see what happens. Get the posts, and here we are again. So this is easy. So we have bindings list, we have the bind source memtable. Those are components that get automatically onto your form when you call bind visually. Let's remove that a little bit. Okay, so next thing. So by using the adapter, the TRESTResponse dataset adapter, long name, but it pretty much describes precisely what it does. It adapts a dataset to a REST requests response, which is typically JSON. Okay, good. So the next thing is probably connect the database or the table in the database to the form as well. So I have a FireDuck connection here, and I connected that one to the actual database. I called the database placeholder, put it into the temp directory, so it's easy for you to recreate everything, and the source will of course be available online. I will put the download link in the comments of that video here. So this is basically everything I modified here. The location of the database, I selected SQLite here as driver ID, and the only thing I changed as well is the open mode. No, not the open mode, the locking mode. The locking mode, I set that to normal from its default value of exclusive, because if you set it to exclusive, then, well, the name or the name of that value suggests it already. You can only open it once from one application if you open it exclusively. And we have this database application here, which is connected to the same database. So that wouldn't work if you would leave the original value of exclusive here. So that's everything I did here. You can do a test and it will connect to the actual database file, and it does so fine. Okay, and then we have, of course, a query. The query is just select everything from posts. That's easy. We can actually execute that one here, and you see it's showing the data from the database. Fine. And that one is, of course, connected to the connection to the left. All right. So again, we are using visual live bindings here. So, oops. Let's go to the Visual Live Binder, and we have, like on the other thing, there's actually even a bind navigator that I used. You can actually hide elements that we don't need here. So we have our string grid. I did the same thing. I just connected the asterisk to the asterisk, added the fields to the string grid, and same thing as before. And I connected the bind navigator just to have a simple tool to move around, to edit and delete and insert records, just for testing purposes. And let's see if still everything works here, because we changed quite a few things. And get the requests, that's it, batch move them, and everything here, just to test if it's still working fine. So this is in the database now, and do the batch move again, and it's updating that single field that we changed. Okay, still the same. Okay, get the post from the service. How does that actually work? Okay, that's easy. Model main get posts. So in my UIs, I'm not even talking about MVVM or something else. I'm at a simple level. I have forms and I have models. You can call those models data modules, whatever you like. There is business logic and UI in a very simple way. MVVM or other techniques are for the more advanced applications, not so much for these simple demos. Okay, so get posts. What does it do? Get posts empties the memory table. Just make sure the memory table is empty. And then, well, it's just calling request post execute. That's all. There is no more programming behind. And then we have the more complicated thing, the batch move. I will get to that one in a minute. And we have refreshDB. refreshDB is just calling refreshDB on the model. And refreshDB on the model, well, not surprising, it just does a queue posts close and a queue posts open. That's all. And when I start, so basically when the data module is created, I just do a refreshDB as well. So that just when the application starts up that we see what's in the database. Simple, easy, and plain. All right, so let's get to the probably most interesting point, which is batch move. So we want to move everything that's in here and move that into that database table below. So as you can see, it does a batch move, and after that it does a refresh DB. All right, so let's have a look how the batch move is to be set up. Okay, batch move. Batch move is something, this is the inner component here, that's a tFileDAC batch move component. All right, so the idea of the batch move component is that it has a source and a target. So here is the source and that is the target. The source is, in our case, a dataset reader. So we are reading from a dataset. Okay, so reading from a dataset in our case probably means we want to read from that memory table because there is the data that we want to move into the database. So not very much surprising. We have dataset empty posts in this dataset reader component. And that dataset reader component is, of course, connected to the reader property of this batch move component. Okay, so where do we want to move our data? We want it to move into the target, and the target is a writer. It's the guy here that writes the data. So we have a TFDBatchmove dataset writer component. And that one writes or takes the data that the batch move component basically provides, and which it gets ultimately from the reader, and takes that data and puts that into a dataset because we have a dataset writer. So I'm using a dataset to write the data into. And that's everything you need to set here. So we need a dataset where we can write the data to. You could have the idea or come to the idea to put the data into the query that drives our grid. Okay, I do not recommend so. Always use a dedicated data set that writes or updates the data in your database. The reason behind that is while doing or performing the batch move, the components, the batch move components will actually change properties in that dataset so that it actually can work with it. So that may lead to unexpected behavior if you connect that one directly to a grid. That's not something you want. So always use a dedicated query or table, whatever is best for you, to that writer component here. So this is pretty much the same as we are using for the grid. The only thing is it will never be used to connect to a visual component. That's the reason. So select from post, that's everything we again need here. Okay. And I actually added all the fields here so that we have them persistently. And then we go to the batch move component. And in the batch move component, there is an important setting. And that's important because there you do the actual mappings. In our case, the mappings are one-to-one. So we have an ID field in the memory table because in our REST request, the ID, the identification, is in a property called ID. That's very easy. So everything is mapped one-to-one here. And you can see you could introduce your own mappings here. You can have different field names in your source and in your target. All right, in our case, everything worked just out of the box here. And to generate that, you can actually do add all mappings. Then it's trying to build that matching list here, the mapping list. Okay. So the next thing is here we need to decide what in what mode do we want the batch move to operate. In our case, I wanted to append any data or any record that comes in and does not exist in the database already. And if the record already exists, then just update it. So the connection is, of course, the ID field, the primary keys. So there is no setting in a direct way which tells the batch move where is our binding key, our primary key, or whatever. The requirement is that the source needs a primary key, and here we go. Let's go here. Yeah, so we actually need to tell the system, and I recreated the persistent fields a few minutes ago, and we need to tell the system that's important that this is the key, and this property, the provider flag in key, this basically makes the ID field the primary key field. Okay, here in the database, actually here, and go to the fields editor and go to the ID. This one already knows about this because FireDuck took or executed the query and analyzed the metadata. And in the database, you can see that here by the tiny key, the ID field is the primary key field, and FireDuck actually automatically detected that the ID field is the primary key field. So in here, ID was selected automatically to be in the key, to be a primary key field. Okay, so when you have this set up, then you basically can go into your code and to execute the batch move. Okay, so queue posts batch, that's our target. We are closing that one, and we are making sure the fetch options are set to mode all, fetch all data, because we basically take some source data and we do all the matching in memory. So to be able to decide that a record already exists in the target in the queue post batch query, we of course need to have it in memory. And by default, FireDuck has a fetch on demand, which wouldn't be very helpful. And that's now even more important. Why do I do that in code? Because if you execute the batch move thing, it will actually set the mode somewhere during the process to manual, and that's counterproductive here when you do the initial thing. So just set it to mode fetch options mode all. Just do it like that, and then open the query. That means fetch all records that match the query, and then just execute the batch move. And then we are done and we can close. Okay, and that's all. It automatically does all the errors, and it skips records that don't exist or already exist there, and it compares. And just do a final test in here. And the final test should, okay, we do it here. Just for testing purposes, put some data in here. Okay, just do a refresh, make sure everything is there. Do the batch move, here we are. Do the batch move again, and it just works. And we changed that one here, so it should still be in the database. Yep, it's there. We can actually delete everything in the database. Okay, do a refresh. Okay, it's empty. Do the batch move, and everything is here again. All right, so this was my demo on how to get JSON data from a REST request into a database table. Thank you for listening. Just send me questions to my email address or comment under the video. Thank you.